one of the protagonists as a city of the last decade. If we go back of 10 years, we find a city that was not so international and at the center of the attention like it was at the end of the decade when we also had the chance to host the Winter Olympic Games of 2026. The last year has been very hard all over the world. It has been very hard for all the cities, and of course it has been very hard for the city of Milan. Now we have to decide what we want to do next. I don't think we should work with the goal to come to the previous normality. First, because we can't travel in the past. In every chance we can't. Second, because we shouldn't want to go back to the past. Of course, we have to keep with us the things that worked before. We hope that people can travel again after the vaccination system. Of course, we want people coming again to Milan for the events, for congresses, for the weeks, for the design week, for the fashion week. But we want also to work to a different model. And distances are different after the pandemic. Why? Many cities, many experts talk about the 15 minutes cities because it's something new. We were used to imagine that we were citizens of the world, and it was not a big difference to be in Milan or in Paris or in New York City. And there was a part of the citizens that do these trips every week before. Now we imagine that what happens in our neighborhood is important. It is decisive to create local services more than before. Of course, there are some kind of services that should be on a metropolitan area or maybe national services. We can't have a high-level hospital in every neighborhood. That's clear for everybody. Like we imagine that we have the right to go to the primary school in every boroughs. Like we imagine that the health system should be reorganized by local services and not just hospital. That was part of the problem in the city of Milan and in Lombardy in the last period. Milan is working in this direction. First, we consider that the last decade was the decade of competition among cities. The new decade, in my idea, is the decade of cooperation. And so what happened in Barcelona or in Paris, it's so important for us because we can share best practices to see what it works and what we can do better or we should change. And so the things that they are making in Barcelona and in Paris especially, the super blocks in Barcelona and the 15-minute cities in Paris is important also for what we are trying to do in Milan. First, we started after the pandemic changing the public space, mainly two directions. First, cycle lane should be part of the future of the city. Of course, it was even in the previous city, but we didn't do as much as we want to do. We had the idea that after the pandemic, we should accelerate it, and this is what we started to do from last spring. Second, we want to live more outside than before. That is why we created a sort of liberalization of tables for bars and restaurants outside. And it's just part of the change because we are making pedestrian squares around schools. That is very important for us, like it is important that we will create 20 new parks in the city in the next decade. So public space is more than before so important in the life of citizens. To engage a better quality of life for the citizens. And this is a part of the future of the city we imagine, investing in the quality of life, not just in creating new jobs, not just in competition. That is what we are trying to do. Second direction we want to work is that, okay, Milan should be again an international city comparing with the best cities in the world, but we have to rediscover the medium-sized distance. Turin is not far, Bologna, Venice, but also all the economy just 10, 20 kilometers far from Milan. It's more important than before, not just because they are places that can help us to reduce the housing pressure on the city of Milan, but because if we go in the direction of the 15-minute cities, we should also adapt and maybe relocate some activities to help people living half an hour far from Milan not to be in the condition to come every day to Milan, but to work also from places close to home. That is a different organization of public spaces, of the economy, also of public transport of the metropolitan area. So we are beginning a new phase after the pandemic. Of course, we imagine we could change without a pandemic. Partially we did, but many things we imagined that couldn't change. Now everything changed. So worse than a pandemic, it's not to use this chance to change what we can change. That is why we should talk with citizens, decide some experiments, try new things, and create a new normality that can help to overcome the pandemic period, but also to imagine cities that faces the problem of climate change, faces the problems of pollution, faces the problem of the quality of life, trying to do something better than what we had before this pandemic. That is why it's so important, this meeting with the important experts we listen to, we read, because nobody knows exactly how the cities in future will be. But dialogues, compare, will help us to find a better solution. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everybody. We are very pleased from the Italian Institute for International Political Studies to host this event on the future of cities. It's a very important and actual topic in the year of pandemic, and we are very pleased and honored to have three very, very distinguished and important guests here coming from all over the world. I'm going to introduce them later. At ISPI, I'm responsible for, my name is Tobias Zevi, and I'm responsible for the program on global cities, which is organized in partnership with Milano. We are very pleased to host this event in the framework of Milano Digital Week, which is a very important and known event in the city. And this is the second year we collaborate on global cities and in general on urban issues. So today, basically the topic is, as we said, the future of cities after this difficult, tragic year of COVID-19. Projects, ideas, utopias, we're going to discuss about them today. And of course, we are discussing these ideas starting from a very, very general common understanding. And the common understanding is that our lives have changed profoundly in the past 12 months in every single aspect, talking about work or living or working or just simply meeting other people and, of course, designing our future, shaping our future. So basically, since cities are the place where the majority of humankind lives and will live in the future, of course, designing and shaping and thinking about the future of cities is basically thinking about the future of a great part of humankind, and therefore about the future of our lives in general. So today we're gonna start with different topics, and of course we have three thinkers and professors and intellectuals that have thought and have written and have discussed a lot about this issue. So I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Carlos Moreno, Professor Saskia Sassen, and Professor Francesca Bria. Very welcome to ISPI and welcome to Milano Digital Week. So I would start, if I manage, with Professor Moreno, because in the general discussion on the city after COVID-19, Professor Moreno was probably the most strenuous supporter of what we call the 15-minute city, a vision already being implemented in metropolises like Paris and Milan. So I would ask you, Professor Moreno, if you may, if you could explain us, and to our audience, of course, what we mean by this definition of 15-minute city, and what will be the benefit, the general benefit, but mainly, most specifically, the environmental benefit for our communities. So, Professor Moreno, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for this kind invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with my good friend Saskia Sassen and Francesca Bria. In fact, you're right. In the city of Paris, with the mayor Anne Hidalgo, we wanted to propose to shift the current paradigm in order to evoke the urban life after this catastrophic period of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. And at the same time, we needed to continue to fight against climate change. This is today one of the most important threats for our urban life. In reality, the concept of a 15-minute city, this is a concept in a framework of the cities and territories of proximity for developing urban life based on low carbon activities, and at the same time to continue to live in this period with the COVID-19 because during this period of the COVID-19 we needed to keep the physical distances, but we needed to keep before all a social intensity. What is the concept? In reality, we wanted to explore the resources, the material or immaterial resources in the proximity based on 4 pillars. The first one, ecology. We wanted to propose a low carbon mobility by foot or by bike within perimeter for having access to the main essential urban social functions. The second point is the proximity. We consider that today we needed to explore, to optimize, to intensify the resources in the proximity for living with the better quality of life. This proximity is at the same time the possibility for use more in the intensive way a lot of infrastructures that today we have a lot of square meters used only for vertical functions. We wanted to promote the multi-purpose functions. We wanted to promote the commerce in the proximity, the one-point shop. We wanted to deploy the new business model, the new economic model in the proximity. The first point is the solidarity. We wanted to develop this concept of James Jacobs, the livable cities, for creating social links, intergenerational links, gender equity, to take care of elderly people, of kids. And the first point is the citizen empowerment. We need to foster people to take part in the activities in the cities. And the citizen empowerment is the possibility to invest each one of local areas. For example, with the participatory budget, the city of Paris has one of the most important, I think that the biggest participatory budget, 800 million euros, only dedicated during this new mandature for the participatory projects by citizens in the local areas. Ecology, proximity, solidarity, and citizen empowerment. For building, for deploying a polycentric city, for developing this multicentric city, for developing a new balance, because we are living today in cities very segregative by the urbanism, architecture, economic and social models. We wanted to propose the social mixity and the mixity of the urban social functions. For finish, we have been developing a new model, a new urban social model, because we consider that if we have the possibility to provide 6 urban social functions in the proximity, we have the possibility to satisfy citizens in our districts, to live, to work, to supply, to care, physical and mental health, to educate, and to enjoy. We consider that if we have the possibility to provide these 6 urban social functions in the proximity in a multicentric way, we have the possibility to transform our city into a new polycentric, vibrant living city. This is the target of the city of Paris. Ms. Anne Hidalgo has embraced this way, and today we have been starting a deep transformation of the city of Paris. Ms. Anne Hidalgo, she said, the 15-minute city in Paris is the big bang of the proximity. This is the massive decentralization. This is the possibility to live differently in city, and the COVID-19 is a big opportunity for change radically our urban lifestyle.
Thank you very much, Professor Moreno, and I'm very happy to tell to our audience that these ideas, these amazing ideas and very interesting ideas, we'll be discussing them later, are entailed in a very, very nice and short but very dense ebook that Professor Moreno has just published. The title is Urban Life and Proximity at the Time of COVID-19. The good part is that the book is also translated in many languages. So please go and find it on the net. Thank you very much, Professor Moreno. And I will move to Professor Sassen. Very happy to have you here, Saskia. It's an honor. And I would kind of start with you with a general question, which goes back to the past. So basically, you codified the idea of global cities back at the beginning of the 90s, and in your seminal book, if I remember correctly, was 1991. You explain how the globalized economy and the global financial system needed to be organized around urban nodes all over the world. So my question is, after COVID-19, such a huge change in our lives, do you believe that this is how the world will look like in the future? Saskia, you have the floor.
Well, this is not an easy question to answer because cities are so different, But ultimately, what we know is that each city requires a fairly long list of similar conditions, or you don't have a city, right? So then the second element is about the rich and the poor. Every city that I know depends to a very large extent on poor people. Now, in some cases, like in the United States, it's as if the rich who live in the centers forget that the poor often travel for 2 hours, arrive very tired at their jobs, right? So I would say that the first few little steps that I would like to see implemented in various big cities is to recognize the cost, what low-wage workers pay in terms of their health, not sleeping, etc. This has become a big issue for me now, because it's really out of hand. It's like, I know many very, very nice people who live in the center of Manhattan or of Paris or wherever, and they simply don't even think, it's just not part of even their knowledge function, that so many workers never sleep enough, have long trips, have to stand in crowded buses, especially, of course, in the global south. You see that more than in the global north. And so for me, one issue really is, how do we get a more just distribution of facilities and of obligations and of engagements, whatever, so that the poor don't have to be at the end of it all and the ones that take the longest trip, etc. And that is something that we could do. Every leadership of a city could make some transformations that are exclusively to the benefit of low-wage workers who live in poorer areas in our big, mostly, frankly, rich cities. So that would be one of my projects. I do not expect it to succeed very easily, but I'm not going to give up the el lamento of that condition, which is of a profound inequality and profound injustice. I can say more, but maybe we can do that later.
Well, okay, Saskia, no, thank you very much. You were very, very short, but very, very clear. And I guess that there is something in common with Francesca Bria. I'm very happy to have you here. And I would start with you, if you agree. You're actually now based in Rome, working for the Italian National Italian Innovation Fund. But I will start from your experience as Barcelona's city councillor, and also, of course, from your researches. So you have always believed in data as a great opportunity to increase people's participation, as Professor Moreno was saying, and improve citizens' quality of life. This is a very, very big issue now in the era of COVID-19, in the era of pandemic. So my very, very basic questions are, what is changing during and will change after the pandemic? And are we finally moving towards a world made, are we finally moving towards a world made of smart cities, or it's just an illusion? Please, Professor Bia, you have the floor. No, Francesca, I think you're mute.
Yes, I'm muted. Okay, hi.
Hi.
So it's great to be here with Carlos and Saskia, and thanks for the invitation. Well, I would like to reconnect to what Carlos and Saskia said, because I think the question of data and putting technology at the service of people, it's a question of democratization of infrastructure, which and democratization also of urban life and sustainability. So I think that actually the smart city is the kind of city that Carlos was talking about, is the ecological city, is the city that's based on solidarity and citizen participation, and also that regains back democratic legitimacy and more, let's say, control over resources and access to public goods, access to basic facilities and basic public services. And I think definitely also connected to what Saskia was saying, I think that during the pandemic, we saw how the pandemic is hitting vulnerable communities very strongly. So communities that don't have access to healthcare, that struggle to have access to resources, that live in locations that are not very well served, but also communities of color, also precarious workers, like riders or workers that are actually providing us with the basic access to services that we need to survive during the pandemic. Women are suffering more. So we do have to redistribute power and resources. And I also think that the role of cities the role of cities is going to be key because after 1 year and a half, where citizens are actually really scared, there is this question of social distancing. There is this question of being at home with very, very strong also social unrest, because lots of people are losing their jobs because we have a huge social and economic shock. We will need to start rebuilding the social fabric of our communities, and we will need to start re-engaging communities in this ecological transition that we have to make. So that's where cities will have lots of agency, and also they should have also more political power. So direct access to resources and more capacity to lead and guide those changes. So at the moment in Europe, we talk a lot about the Next Generation EU as an opportunity for the ecological and digital transition, which does not increase social inequalities, right? So this importance of social cohesion, which in terms of smart city actually impose a complete rethinking of the paradigm. First of all, I think we are moving with this ecological paradigm and ecological transformation, maybe a bit away from this megalopoly, these cities that are based on the density of bodies, and maybe moving more towards, Stefano Boeri in Italy talks a lot about this archipelago of connected borgo with rural areas, internal areas, and cities, also due to the access to digital technologies that can become a right to all citizens. For example, access to connectivity as a public good, which is very important. So we can also redefine public space in this sense, bring more green to the city center, like planting new trees, bring, green, increase public space, and also transforming urban life as in terms of improving air quality. So the net zero strategy that Carlos was talking about, decarbonizing the economy, shifting to electrical and connected and sustainable mobility, which also mean fighting climate change. In this respect, and improving also the urban services such as waste management, how much electricity and energy we consume, heat, how much heat we produce, the type of CO2 emissions in buildings that we have. So in this respect, you can look at data as a critical infrastructure. So this basically democratization of data, or democratic control over data, what I've been calling in Barcelona data sovereignty with citizens' control, would enable better decision making, but also would enable us to really direct this digital transition towards the ecological transition and towards giving more power to the people. And let me basically end by saying that also during the pandemic, we saw a huge concentration of power in the hands of very few companies, in particular, if we think about big tech and how much their share value has increased during the pandemic, because of course, shifting lots of basic activities to digital, like smart working, online education, digitalizing healthcare, digitalizing public services, we more and more depend on these critical infrastructures. And at the moment, the ownership of those critical infrastructure is concentrated in the hands of 5 to 7 big multinational companies in the world, which are either the big tech from the US or the big tech from China. So definitely we do have a question of monopolies over data and digital infrastructure. And I think democratizing this access to technology and data and using data for the public interest and as a public good can be a shift in paradigm, which will allow us to achieve the big objective of the net zero and the Green Deal, to create better jobs, to create, to shift to the ecological transition, and to create the kind of cities based on solidarity and citizens and communities participation that we want.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Bria. And I find very interesting, in my opinion, that starting from three different points of view, from space and time with Professor Moreno, from economy with Saskia, from technology with you, Professor Bria, we actually arrived to the same cross-cutting problem, which is actually how to increase and how to guarantee democracy and social cohesion worldwide, and especially in our big cities, which are, of course, the forefront of every single challenge, and especially the social challenge. And therefore, I would go back to Professor Moreno, who was speaking about polycentric city. So, Professor Moreno, this sounds like a very interesting concept. Of course, we've heard and we've been discussing about this issue for many years worldwide. But my question, which is related to all the discussion that we did about segregation and exclusion, is how can we guarantee that we manage to connect people within a whole and unique city if they start to work, live, and play in the same area? Are we designing a city which is made of red lines? In a way, this is what I'm asking that because we know that urban systems are attractive just because they allow different people to meet despite their origin, their culture, and of course also the neighborhood they dwell in. So my question is, how do we guarantee these two criteria, these two needs? The one, of course, of reducing flows and reducing pollutions and maybe reducing dispersion of people. But on the other hand, how do we guarantee that we have a unique soul of the city in a way? Please, Professor Moreno. You're mute, Professor.
Sorry, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you for this question. Indeed, if we wanted to discuss about the polycentric city, the guarantee for developing a city for all, it is very important to keep in mind that, two different items. The first one, we need today to develop not only the low carbon city. In reality, the concept, the main concept is the sustainable city. The sustainable city, this is in reality the convergence between three aspects: the ecological, social, and economical new attitude. We need, of course, to develop very important ecological actions for having a low carbon city, but at the same time we need to propose a new economic model for fighting against poverty, and with the social impact, the positive social impact to fight against exclusion. This is the first point in the polycentric city. The second point, for developing this new social fabric, I wanted to use the term of Francesca Bria. The focus for us in the city of Paris, about 15-minute city, is the common goods. We consider that we need today to promote a very ambitious urban policy about the common good. The citizen movement, the citizen platform of the Mayor Anne Hidalgo for this recent electoral campaign is Paris en commun. This is to develop the common good for Paris. The common good in the polycentric city, in reality, is the guarantee for proposing a new way with the new tools and the new investments in order to developing in the polycentric city the access for different elements. A concrete example, the city of Paris has been developing now a new commercial property. The commercial property, it is a subsidiary, 100% of the city of Paris, for buying square meters and to rent, for installing in different districts, in different areas, in different boroughs, the shops, the commerce, without the traditional real estate market. We have the possibility, in consequence, for installing libraries, art gallery, shops for recycling, and different commerce without the pressure of speculative or high rentability, high profit. This is a concrete example of the common good in the city of Paris. And we have been starting the same actions for housing. We have been creating a new real estate of the city of Paris, a subsidiary, 100% of the city of Paris, for buying square meters and to rent with without the same pressure of the speculative market. And in general, our idea is to promote in all kind of sectors: health, education, commerce, sports, cultural activities, the different leverages with the investments in order to promote this common good. And if you have the possibility to mix with the citizen participation, with the active democracy, with the possibility for joining people to take part in each one of the actions, we have the possibility to develop this polycentric city, because we have the possibility to spread in different sectors for promoting new activities. The participatory budget is a very powerful tool for spreading in different places of the city. The participatory budget, we have 17 boroughs in Paris. We have the possibility to propose with this participatory budget the possibility for fostering citizens, for developing a lot of projects, several projects, very different projects, artistic, economical, for the sociability, for cultural activities, etc., etc. And for finishing, I think, and I agree with Francesca, the digital technologies is a powerful tool for increasing the citizen participation, because you have the possibility to create the digital platforms. But our target, this is to propose the hybridization, the digital platforms in the real life. In particular, for example, for cultural activities, educational activities, and fostering the actions for poverty, for immigration, because this is the possibility for including people in our activities. Two short examples: the TUMO. TUMO, this is the new school, totally free, created by Anne Hidalgo, totally free for kids and teenagers, 8 years old until 20, for promoting the digital technologies in the conversions or cultural activities. And this is a very, very totally successful. We have today more than 3,000 of kids and teenagers who have been becoming for being in activity with the digital technologies. And the new project with Anne Hidalgo is to create the Climate Academy, l'Académie du Climat. This Climate Academy is the same project for open in different points of the city, the places in order to develop educational activities for kids, for teenagers, in the convergence of the sensibilization to climate change, and to develop the concrete activities in each one of boroughs for showing that our active commitment is necessary if we want to create a new paradigm, if you wanted to change the mindset of people, and for that the mindset of young people.
Thank you very much, Professor Moreno. And we truly admit that Paris is becoming a model for cities around Europe and around the world. For example, Milan is actually reproducing and, of course, reinventing this model as well, talking about the 15-minute city and also the actually the times of the city, which is another very important concept. You mentioned in your intervention the issue, very important, about housing and about real estate. And Saskia Sassen, in her recent studies, in your recent studies, Saskia, showed how real estate dynamics and finance often shaped an increasingly unjust urban market. So the pandemic has changed a lot in terms of urban spaces. We will probably demand for larger homes and smaller offices, or at least we imagine so, and ways of co-working and co-living, as well as other forms of sharing economy. So my question, Saskia, for you is, how do you foresee the future with regards to urban space, public space, and of course, very important, the real estate market?
Well, yeah, thank you for these issues, raising these issues. Well, I think on the one hand, that we are forgetting how these cities are expanding, the big cities I'm talking about. They're expanding, and the workers that have to go to the center, they never sleep enough. You know, they are basically getting ill just from lack of sleep because they have these long trips. People at the center, like I see that in New York City and so many other cities, they forget that there are some of the workers that they really need who just always arrive half dead at their jobs, and even deader by the time they're done with their daily jobs. So for me, this is a real issue. One answer is we need to build more cities. Now, when you mention that to people, building more cities, the notion is for many people, including a lot of my students, they think, okay, we have done the bit of building cities. No, we haven't. We are allowing large cities in vast concentrations of people to expand. So for me, that is like exhibit number one is we need to confront the fact that funding will have to be found to build new cities and to stop expanding cities. Now, you know, when you look at Europe, mostly that is so incredibly reasonable, everything as a continent. Paris might be one of the real big ones, etc. But when you look at other parts of the world, when you look at the Americas, it's savage what's happening there. And so we need to address that. For me, that is extremely important. I really do not worry about the elites and the good schools and everything that is good, fine. But let's really focus where we really need to elaborate the data, to make it very public, to create a certain real energy that we have got to stop expanding these cities endlessly. The only advantage is for the rich, the ones who don't even realize that their workers are working. So that for me is one key issue. The other issue is, of course, the whole notion of how do we transform, which has already been brought up. How do we transform our cities into functions, into conditions, into actors that can really add positively to the whole destructive modes that we have created across the centuries and that now are finally really hitting us back, and we are aware of this. And that is going to be its own thing. I can already see in the diverse parts of the world where I sort of function a bit, many types of innovations that are extremely different one from the other. It's not like they're all doing the same thing, but there are really a whole broad range of interventions that we in the West because the West has not been so good at that. I would say China and Japan, and they have done much better. And even now also in Africa, they are just more innovative because they're basically starting a bit from scratch. And so they can immediately apply and use these new technologies. But we here in the West, who have comfortably lived in our big cities that have been there for a very long time, we really need some serious restructuring of a very different kind from what I would say I see in China or in Japan or in some of those other countries. So one other issue is, how do we stop expanding the cities we have? Because that, I repeat, is only to the advantage of the rich and the privileged. You don't have to be very rich, but how do we recognize the lives of the poorer working classes who often, they never sleep enough, never, not one day that they can actually sleep enough. There is a kind of invisible injustice in that I would really, that for me becomes a fighting call, to recognize the sleep function. Now, maybe it's because I'm old, and I really enjoy sleeping, but I think there is a deeper set of issues here in play. And I think that, I mean, the other point to mention is again, I referred to it already, but Latin America, that is deep trouble. I find it more in deep trouble, let's say, than Africa, which is quite a contrast in a way. So Latin America has become a site for brutally expanded cities that are where some people die young because they're poor and they have to do these very long trips. We've got to recognize those kinds of issues. They're big and they will be difficult, to handle.
Thank you very much, Saskia. I agree that Latin American cities are a big issue, although we have very, very interesting examples of renewing and reborning cities in Latin America. I'm thinking of Medellin, which is a very, very famous example in terms of yeah, of course. I mean, it's always an exception. I mean, but still, I actually, it's the last place I was before pandemic. Maybe that's why I was so impressed, because it's the last place I've seen before the pandemic, and it was amazing. I mean, what they did in terms of mobility and what they did in terms also of innovation and technology, really amazing, and in certain way comparable to Barcelona as a very, very innovative hub. So Professor Bria, I'm coming back to you, and there are many inputs we were actually given by Carlos Moreno and Saskia Sassen, but I would like to go back a little bit to the issue of what you call digital sovereignty, and actually the issue of how we guarantee democracy within this general framework of data and technology. Among the most interesting articles I read in the past 12 months, there are those of historian like Yuval Harari or a professor like Shoshana Zuboff, who are actually warning us about the huge risks we are actually facing in terms of privacy, in terms of rights, and also, in terms of technology invading our lives and even our bodies, because of course we know that we need technology and data to fight the virus, to fight the pandemic, and also, the challenges we're facing. So my question to you, you've been working about this issue for many years. So my question to you is what is changing during the pandemic, and how, in your opinion, we should move forward in order to reduce the threats we are facing in this respect?
Yes, thanks for the question. Maybe I would like to address the question, also reconnecting a bit to the debate and to what Carlos and Saskia have been saying, in a sense that for me it's very important to understand that when we talk about digital sovereignty, indeed we talk about political and economic sovereignty as well. And I also don't use the expression digital sovereignty or sovereignty only to mean that there should be a kind of state-driven control over technological infrastructures, data, and the use of this technology. But I actually use it to mean popular sovereignty, citizen sovereignty, and also democratic control over technologies and infrastructures. Maybe democratizing infrastructures, I think, is the best way to understand it, which I think it reconnects to what both Saskia and Carlos have been talking about, which in fact it is combining the economic, the social, but also the integration of digital technologies with urban infrastructure and physical spaces. So we do not have to, understand the digital as disconnected. For instance, by posing the question of how those platforms are changing the way we deliver public healthcare to people, or the way we reorganize public education, or the way we rethink public space in cities, or how we tackle the crisis of climate change, or how we address the question of affordable housing and the question of unsustainable models of tourism or unsustainable rent extraction from the big businesses. So we have to understand that the big impact of those platforms is in fact changing the reorganization of the welfare state. And that's why I think when we talk about technology and data, in fact, we're talking about broader political, geopolitical as well, because as I said before, at the moment we are seeing again a new kind of let's say, war over technological supremacy on one side from Silicon Valley and the big tech in the US, and on the other side from what, usually I call the big state Chinese model. And you have this kind of biggest economies which are really trying to basically, there is a war over artificial intelligence, the control of chips, the control of 5G networks and cloud infrastructures, which are going to be the fundamental infrastructures that are going to change all sectors of the economy. And so who can determine the rules and who can produce also these technologies at home, of course, will have a much better, will be much better position also to show that there is a different way. For instance, I mean, this is the European problem, where Europe is considered to be a kind of regulatory superpower when it comes to the digital society. So we have, for instance, put very much strongly forward an idea of digital humanism that puts fundamental rights, the privacy of citizens, ethics and security at the very core of how we use data and technology, with the GDPR, but also with an advanced competition and antitrust regulation, claiming that we need to tax the big tech because we need to redistribute the value of digitalization throughout society. But at the same time, if we are not able to produce these technologies at home, so to have a fully digital industrial policy, so that we can have cloud computing here, we can have broadband infrastructure as a right of citizen. Access to broadband should be considered a right for citizens, but also 5G networks and the microprocessors. This is as important as producing hydrogen technology, as producing electric batteries, and as producing, all the technologies that we need for the value chains of the future. So it has to be clear that here the question is really to rethink an industrial policy, basically, because it's not only you are, you can say that you want to have a kind of democratic digital society and have democratic standards, for instance, on how our data is used, which is absolutely important, because I think if we can control more the use of data, but also if we can produce public value with data, which is the most important thing, then we are able to address all these different questions, and also to say, you can have, for instance, new platform for home rentals, for food delivery, for all this kind of innovation, but it should preserve workers' rights, it should preserve environmental standards, and it should obey to local regulation when it comes to taxes and to all the kind of welfare benefits that it produces. So, for instance, you cannot keep your profit in tax havens. I mean, this is the minimum that we can think about. So basically, the question there, it's not only surveillance, I would say. So just to come back to your question, I think, it's not only the surveillance driven business model that Shoshana Zuboff and Harari are addressing, but it is really about rethinking the social and economic dimension of digitization and making sure that we are moving towards a model that's going to benefit the many and not the few. So this is coming back to Saskia. It's not only for the privileged and for the rich that we're going to build this innovation, but it is really to enable us to transition towards a more sustainable and a solidarity-driven society, and to include communities in this kind of process. So this has to be, for me, the direction. So it is not only about accelerating digitization, but it is about giving it a direction that is, in fact, just to close here the circle, the common good. I mean, meaning we want more citizen participation, we want to redistribute power, and we want the common good. And I don't think it's by chance that here you have the Paris en Común and the Barcelona en Común experience, which are, I mean, in this respect, they are really about rethinking also the relationship between citizens and governments, and rethinking public space and rethinking cities to benefit, in fact, the less privileged as well. So I think that's where we have to position the debate about technology and data, which is actually a debate about how we are shaping the future of our society and who is determining the rules for this future.
Thank you very much, Professor Bria, because also you managed to interact with all the speeches, and this was very useful, I think. So I think we have a few minutes left, so I would try a very, very short third round, but we need brief answers. And my question for Professor Moreno, and then for Saskia, and then for Professor Bria is basically what we can do to foster this very, very important word that Professor Bria just mentioned, the word community. Because what I fear is that actually being here smart working and having wonderful webinars online and actually having so many services which are technological, we are losing a lot of human connections. Thinking about what Jane Jacobs wrote, or thinking about what Saskia wrote just 30 years ago, we are now used to working and actually living much more alone. And loneliness is a big, big illness in our societies, I think. Moreover, we have an issue about, small shops, small sidewalks, like the soul of our communities. We really risk to lose our identity as community before than our, services as community. So I would like the three of you, if you can, briefly to answer this question, then we conclude our very interesting conversation. And thank you very much, you all, for this availability. Professor Moreno, please.
Thank you. I think that we need today, in this way, to foster people to develop the livable neighborhood. We wanted to help communities for developing the local capacities to initiate or to engage the local programs based on the circularity of the urban social functions, not only the circular economy, but the circularity of the urban social functions. The mix of the urban social functions is, of our point of view, very important. To mix the educational activities, to mix culture, to mix commerce, to shopping, to mix the work in the local areas, to develop green areas, to reconquer public spaces. This is one of the most important points if we wanted to promote the urban democracy, because if we have the possibility to rediscover public spaces
And when I can now, Richard,
with the mixity, with the social mixity, with the gender equity, we have the possibility to develop these livable cities of Jane Jacobs. But at the same time, we needed to fight the transformation with the digital technologies of people in the zombie geek. I call zombie geeks people fully connected by technologies, at the same time fully social disconnected. And we needed to, the zombie geek, but we needed to promote this hybridization in the real life with the social circularity for integrate digital technologies in a process for the create the added social value, not only economical value, not only ecological value. We need to create this integrative social value, ecological, economical, and social. This is the concept of the sustainable neighborhood. If we have the possibility for that each one of us take part with the deep commitment for transforming each one of square meters in the private or public in this vibrant, sustainable neighborhood, you have the possibility to spread in the totality of cities this same way. The social circularity is, in my mind, one of the way for building this livable city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Moreno. And this is a nice definition, social circularity. And I agree that actually sustainable is still the most effective adjective we have to describe what we call this environment, this positive ecosystem. Professor Sassen, a few words about this social challenge and this, I would say, human challenge we are facing nowadays.
Sort of one way of thinking about it is that we have poor cities in rich countries, not all of them, but I mean, we also have that. And we also have rich cities in poor countries. And this is one of those issues, these juxtapositions that I'm really thinking about. I'm thinking, why is it so difficult to do redistribution, and whatever, but you understand what I'm saying, the poor cities in rich countries and rich cities in poor countries, why can't we just get something that is more balanced? That is sort of one issue that I really care about. The other thing is this extraordinary in our rich cities, very often, mostly I think, we have more and more people who live on the street. They're mostly older people, but they're either quite young or quite old. And every now and then in Manhattan, an old person or a young person is found dead of the cold, not of something else. When you stand back, you say, this is an extreme issue when there's this much wealth, this much intelligence, this much blah, blah. And so the question is, why is it so difficult to cut across, to move really into these other worlds that inhabit our cities and that are very easily sort of invisible. Let's see, I think I would just leave it at that. I think that is, and in there for me hangs a notion of, is there a meaning to this concept of democratizing the city? What does that actually mean today? I mean, it sounds very good. Democratizing cities sounds very good. Cities, moreover, are democratic institutions. But question is, do we need to democratize a bit more? And what are the instruments? Can it be the types of tools that Bria was describing? Can it be the mobilizations that you are doing in Paris, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, And is there a language that we should actually strengthen that captures something about cities that most people who live in cities, or those who do not live in cities, just never think about? I think there's a very long list of elements that should be out there in the open, so to say, because they would enable an understanding about the complexity that is often involved in a city and the miseries that we can find even in the richest cities.
Thank you very much, Professor Sass. And you were speaking about New York City, but I'm speaking now from Rome. And unfortunately, the issue of people dying in the streets is very, very actual and very, very present, although we have a much warmer climate and a much, I would say, welcoming environment. That's good.
Something is something.
Thank you very much. And Professor Bria, you have the floor for the conclusion. It's a cultural and social challenge. You've said much, so basically it's it's difficult to conclude, but please, you have the floor.
Yeah. No, one thing I wanted to say is that we have to be very careful with this coming back to the city. In fact, in a sense that we've seen it in Europe with the Gilets jaunes, we have seen it in the US with the fracture between the big cities and the countryside and people that are left out. And feel left out of this, economic and social development. And I think we need to avoid this to create new inequalities and new fractures. And I think we need to avoid to do this in the post-pandemic times. In particular, now that we're going to have expansive fiscal policies, injecting lots of money into the economy. In the US is happening, but it's happening also in Europe with Next Generation EU. And I think this question of reducing inequalities, territorial, social, gender, all of it, it should be very much at the core. And then maybe, we have to move away from this kind of city-centric approach. For instance, Rem Koolhaas, as we know, speaks about smart countrysides all the time. Now the van der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, she's speaking about a new European Bauhaus to rethink the Green Deal. The Bauhaus is born not in big cities, but in villages, in the more kind of rural area, and it was attracting and bringing people in those villages and rethinking this new ecological and social way to live also outside of the city, and then reconnecting them back also through the use of digital technology. So I think, just to summarize, maybe we can say we do need a green digital deal, a new social pact to do that. And this social pact, but also the Green Deal, cannot be achieved via a top-down technocratic approach, and not also via a techno-solutionist approach. So we need to do it through the involvement of citizens, to the active democracy, to the active participation of communities and of citizens, because only in this way we can shift massively our behavior, because it's going to be really about, Saskia has said so many times that, workers are not sleeping, and that, people are not living a good life. But anyway, it is about reconquering a better life, but also we need to shift our consumption. We need to decarbonize. We need to reduce carbon emission. We do have to achieve this Green Deal starting from our life, yes, the change of our collective life. So I want to basically end by saying that, of course, a democratization of digital technologies and data, and to believe that those can be democratically controlled and can be mobilized for the public interest. It is a powerful tool that we can also have as an objective, but I think the challenge is broader, and the broad challenge is to really achieve this transformation starting from the ground up. So starting by mobilizing by mobilizing communities and mobilizing people.
Thank you very much, Professor Bria, and thank you very much to all of you. It was a wonderful conversation. I'm sure it is just one of those we will be making in the next months and years, because the issue is very actual, but it's also very forward-looking. And on behalf of the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, ISPI, and the Milano Digital Week, I'm very grateful for you having accepted our invitation, and I hope that we do really have the opportunity to collaborate and discuss again about this issue. Thank you very much, and
thank you.
Good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure.
Ciao, cari, ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Molto piacere.
Cari.